Hey guys, I hope we're all good. I hope we're all happy and healthy. This is an exciting day for me because this is our last lecture of the semester. So thank you to all who have been here the whole way. Again, if you saw these past 21 lectures, just pat yourself on the back. You deserve a congratulations because you've definitely persevered through this trying semester. But in today's lecture, we're going to focus on pollution, but more modern day interaction. So here you see this picture in front of you, which is a woman holding tap water from Flint, Michigan, in 2014, right? So pollution is occurring today in our own country. And I wanted to bring these ideas to you and shed light on some, newer ideas of pollution. So we actually should have learned some of these terms. There was some chapters that you should have read that dealt with water pollution. And just a quick review, there are point sources and non-point sources. So a point source, like its name suggests, you can actually point to it and know exactly where that pollution is coming from. So this is an example of a point source. It's a pipe. If you plug up this pipe, then you essentially stop the pollution from entering the fresh water or marine system. A non-point source is something that it's a pollution source that isn't a confined source, right? It is like runoff from a agricultural field, right? It's much harder to stop a non-point source. Another great non-point source is acid rain, right? How do you stop acid rain? Yeah, it's coming from a cloud and clouds, but it's not like a single pipe that you can redirect or filter or just completely block. So there's non-point source and then point source. Now there is biological pollution as well as inorganic pollution. So here we have E. coli. Now E. coli is really important to humans. Without it, we wouldn't be able to digest the food that we eat, and we wouldn't be able to get vitamins, certain vitamins like vitamin K from our diet. Another interesting thing is that for every one cell of for every one human cell in your body, there are 10 bacterial cells. So there are 10 times the amount of bacteria in your body than your own cells. So that, in essence, should make you realize how important these organisms are. They are mutualist, especially when they are in our gut, in our small and lower intestine. However, if they get into our bodies where they shouldn't be, like if we drink them in water, we can get really, really sick. It's an interesting idea that they are really beneficial and they're mutualists when they are occurring in our lower gut. But if they get in our respiratory system or our upper digestive tract, we can get really, really sick and you can actually die. So human waste that makes its way into fresh water is a great example of biological pollution. Now, inorganic pollution, like this picture, actually depicts heavy metals, and I believe this water that we see is rich in cadmium, which is why we see this purple-like color. Now, this is not Photoshop. This is actually a picture of this pollution making its way into this larger freshwater system. So obviously biological pollution includes pathogens and waste. Many of these pathogens, they cause diseases around the world, especially in lower income places. You get these waterborne diseases like typhoid, cholera, dysentery from bacterial or amoeboids, and then all these other ailments that are associated with waterborne diseases. If any coliform bacteria are present in a water sample, infectious pathogens are usually assumed to be present also. So, people studying water quality of a specific area, they will actually specifically test for those as they indicate the presence of other pathogens, kind of an indicator species. We learned previously, and this is a concept that we tend to revisit all the time, and this suggests that the more biological pollutants that are dumped into an area, the lower the oxygen in that water column becomes. So this should spark a light bulb from the late Devonian extinction event. Remember those vascular plants washing into fresh water, as well as the shallow oceans. They increase the amount of nutrients, which causes algal blooms. Algal blooms, again, they eventually die, and then they are decomposed by bacteria that suck up the available oxygen, which then in turn, changes the biotic system. So instead of, ecologists and people studying water quality, instead of them taking water samples and identifying the bacteria, maybe like sequencing the DNA in the bacteria that they find and doing all these expensive tests, a really simple way to, get a quick understanding of that aquatic system is to just take a dissolved oxygen reading. If the dissolved oxygen is low, that means that there is probably a high amount of biological pollutants. If the dissolved oxygen is high, that probably means that there is fewer sources of biological pollutants. So here we have this term, oxygen sag, and we have from a point source. The closer you are to a point source, usually, especially if it's releasing biological pollutants, closer to a point source, the water is going to have a lower dissolved oxygen. You will see this graph suggesting that there is an oxygen sag near the point source. Further away from the point source, the dissolved oxygen in the aquatic system increases and increases. And with that, you have different species assemblages. Right near the point source, there are species. The only species that show up are species that can live with low oxygen levels. Interestingly, we see that sludge worms here on the bottom of in this sediment near the point source, they are red. Now, I remember I talked about hemoglobin and the role of hemoglobin in our blood. Hemoglobin is what makes blood red. And that red coloration, is because of this 4-molecule protein called hemoglobin. The role of hemoglobin is to grab onto oxygen and deliver it throughout our body. So it makes sense that these worms are red because they have really high amounts of hemoglobin, which is an adaptation to live in areas that are, relatively low oxygen. So it makes a ton of sense that we see these sludge worms that are packed with hemoglobin that can live in these oxygen-depleted parts of the water column. Outside of the oxygen-depleted zones, you do not see that many sludge worms as they are outcompeted by other invertebrates, right? So we tend to see them near these sections, and also they are indicator species of oxygen. So even if you don't have a dissolved oxygen reader, take a benthic sample, and if you see a lot of these sludge worms, you can bet your bottom dollar that there's low amounts of oxygen there. Further away from the point source, you have a recovery zone. You have fish and other invertebrates that can live in slightly lower oxygen levels, but they still obviously require at least some oxygen. And then you have the clean zone. These clean zones are going to be the most biodiverse. And I just really like how the species assemblages changes in relation to the distance from a point source releasing biological pollutants. Now this brings up Lake Erie. Again, I like teaching about the Great Lakes and Lake Erie because here we are in Buffalo, New York. 22% of the Earth's fresh water is right in our own backyard. And as you know, the population around these Great Lakes increased, so too did the pollution and the runoff from farms and industrial centers. And it makes sense that these dark sections are areas of anoxic conditions. Now, before we get into this any further, we should realize that usually in many freshwater lakes, there are layers within the lake itself. So we all know that ice is less dense than water. That's why ice floats to the top. But cold water actually is more dense than warm water. So because of this, usually, and some really shallow lakes, they don't have these layers, and the layers are just constantly mixing. And on a windy day, in Lake Erie, you don't see these layers. But if it's really still, you will eventually see these horizons. And you could take temperature readings. You can drop, I've done this on a boat studying freshwater ecosystems. There is, just a temperature reader, and you drop it a meter at a time and record the temperature. And you can actually find the layer at which the epilimnion becomes the hypolimnion. So the epi refers to surface. So the epilimnion is near the surface. It usually has warmer water, and the hypolimnion has cooler water. So here you have this large area in the central basin, which is quite shallow, is a potential area for the hypolimnion to become anoxic or oxygen depleted. And then we have these figures. Through time, you get more and more pollution. And then in the 70s, there was a lot of changes. There was the Clean Water Act, as well as the Endangered Species Act, which limited, pollution and dumping, and agricultural runoff. So around that time, you have these areas greatly become decreased in size, but they are still 100% going to be there. Now, here we have the fish placement with no stratification, right? Because fish, they like certain temperatures, right? So there are many fish that require, slightly warmer temperatures. And here, when there is no stratification, these fish can exist freely throughout much of the Great Lakes Central Basin. However, when there is stratification, meaning that there is an epilimnion and a hypolimnion, you do get this layer. And if fish venture too long in the hypolimnion, they will die because there isn't enough oxygen. Now, this is a really interesting idea because the position of Lake Erie and the Great Lakes in relation to wind actually changes the position of the hypolimnion. So wind, for example, will push the epilimnion over one side, and then the epilimnion will move down and actually push the hypolimnion to one side, right? So the we call this the fetch, right? So the fetch is like the shape of the freshwater system in relation to wind. So yeah. So just some details about these freshwater systems. Right, Rocco? You like water. Plant nutrients and cultural eutrophication. Rivers and lakes that have clear water and low biological productivity are said to be oligotrophic. So if something is really, really clear, if water is really, really clear, there probably isn't a lot of nutrients in it. So we call those lakes oligotrophic. Oligotrophic lakes are extremely rare now because humans are constantly interacting with freshwater systems, and we tend to increase the nutrient loads in these systems. Now, eutrophic systems are rich with organisms and organic materials, and those are, all over the place. When human activities greatly accelerate eutrophication, this is called cultural eutrophication. So remember, the next time you're driving out into the country, take a look at the ponds you might see near farms, and take note of that green algae, which is a sign of eutrophication. Inorganic pollutants include metal, salts, and acids, right? And you guys know that mercury is, one of the leading causes of many ailments of these inorganic pollutants. So, certain fish you're not supposed to eat so much of because they have high levels of mercury. Now, mercury is released from incinerators and coal-burning power plants, and it is definitely the most widespread toxic metal contaminant in North America. Other metals include lead, tin, and cadmium, and these metals are highly persistent as they accumulate in food chains, and then as we eat those fish, we can have severe deleterious effects. So mercury contamination in fish is common in many United States. So there are commonly signs like this where people fish, fish consumption advisories. Fish in this area contains chemicals. Eating too much of it might become harmful, especially for pregnant women and children. So in Buffalo, there was a campaign to teach immigrants about polluted fish. So this was pretty recent in the early 2010s. We had this signed $3 million Great Lakes Legacy Act agreement with these larger environmental groups, and $1.9 million was awarded in Great Lakes restoration to initiate it for this grant funding. So this was implemented by the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper. If you're interested in ecological restoration, this is a great place to start. So you can do a lot with studying the environment. And, if you really like this course and you want to be, get a job in environmental issues, the Buffalo Niagara Waterkeeper is a great place to start. You can get, internships and, find your way working and helping preserve the Great Lakes system, planting trees in riparian zones. So really, really cool. I know a bunch of people that really love their time at Buffalo Niagara Keeper, but I'm focusing on this procedure that they did. So Buffalo, as you might know, is a city that is has a high number of immigrants. The U.S. government has resettled nearly 60,000 refugees in the United States in 2012 from Myanmar, Bhutan, Iraq, Somalia, and elsewhere. My mother is a Buffalo school teacher, and she just has such a diversity of students from all around the world. But many of the aforementioned countries, she has many students from these countries. So new immigrants, many of them were unaware of the area's industrial past, right? Buffalo and several other cities resting on the Great Lakes were involved in this shipping and trade routes from these regions to Lake Erie all the way to the eastern seaboards. So with our rich industrial history, many companies actually dumped waste into waterways. Now I really like this figure because this is the watershed. We haven't heard that term yet. So a watershed is an area in which topography, people that study topography have come up with these maps, and basically a droplet of water that hits any of this yellow region will eventually end up in the Great Lakes. So any dumping of water in any streams within this yellow region will eventually make its way into the Great Lakes. So this is what a watershed is. So fish from Lake Erie are much safer to eat, fish from Lake Superior are much safer to eat than fish from Lake Erie. Now you have to know these 4 reasons. Number 1, Lake Superior, if we were to look at Lake Superior right here, has much fewer people surrounding it. So less populated cities rest on Lake Superior. Its volume in this figure suggests its volume, right? And Lake Superior has the highest water volume, right? It's actually like 25 times the volume of Lake Erie. Obviously, if you put a cup of mercury in a gallon, and that's just an insane amount of mercury, really. But a cup of mercury in a gallon of water versus a cup of mercury in an Olympic-sized pool, which one would you rather pour over your body? Obviously, the more diluted mercury in the Olympic-sized pool. So here's the same idea, right? The larger the volume, the more pollutants it takes to have deleterious effects on the biological system, right? And then depth. Depth is actually really important because many of these pollutants, they actually sink to the bottom of the fresh water. Lake Erie is not deep. So yes, those pollutants sink, but on a windy day, all those pollutants get, churned up back into the water column over and over again. Whereas, there are pollutants that have stayed on the bottom of Lake Superior since they were first put there, 100 years ago. And then finally, we have the first position. So Lake Superior is the first position of the Great Lakes. So water entering Lake Superior, right, will then move into Lake Huron and then move into Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, right? So because of this, what's going on? Oh, Rocco's head was on my mouse. Bro, look alive. All right. So Lake Erie actually eventually does get some of the pollutants that have entered Lake Superior and Lake Huron, right? So that's a really good idea to understand that Lake Superior being the first position is not going to ever get the pollutants put into any other lake because it's flowing from Lake Superior all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So back to the immigrants in Buffalo, and there is a socioeconomic interactions at play that have to do with human health. So many Burmese refugees are poor. They come from these war-ridden countries, and they don't have much. So they need to feed their family, and right near the Peace Bridge, right on Squaw Island, which I believe is called like Freedom Island now. Someone can correct me. It's not called Squaw Island anymore. But many immigrants actually fish on this island to feed their families. And as you know, even with the pollution in the Lake Erie, we still have a pretty diverse array of freshwater fishes that are quite sizable that could, feed your family. But again, funded by government grants, an education campaign was launched. Educators would approach anglers on Squaw Island. There we go. Now actually called Unity Island. So there you go. They explained that there was heavy metals in the water, and this accumulated in fish. Remember the term we learned last week, bioaccumulation. So heavy metals accumulate in fish. They taught the anglers about the ailments attributed with consuming heavy metals, the risk to cancers and other ailments. And anglers and educators met halfway. So telling them to stop eating fish is not the best solution, right? They're poor, they still have to feed their families, and being the bad guy telling them to just stop, they're just going to go in the middle of the night. But by telling them to, eat smaller species and avoid fishing species that live, below the thermocline. So the thermocline is the region between the epilimnion and the hypolimnion. So anglers were told to not fish for those bottom-dwelling fish that are interacting with more pollutants. So, fish near the surface and eat smaller species, right? Because again, these smaller species are going to have fewer pollutants in them through this process we call biomagnification, right? So they met halfway, and it has been rather successful. So a really good education effort there, meeting halfway, not telling them to just stop fishing, but teaching them about, what fish to eat, what fish to avoid, and, the pollutants that they have eaten has significantly decreased through these measures. Sediment and heat also degrade water. Sediment is a natural part of river systems. Sediment fertilizes floodplains and creates fertile deltas, but human activities, chiefly farming and urbanization, greatly cause increased sediment loads in rivers. It's really weird, but there is such thing as thermal pollution. Usually from cooling systems of power plants, they will release water, and those waters are going to be higher in temperature. Raising water temperatures from normal levels can have adverse effects on the quality of aquatic life. So here we have sediments, right? And these are just clay particles, right? But you can see how this is going to change the aquatic system. Predators, for example, that rely on attacking their prey using their eyes are going to have a much harder time, successfully feeding on potential prey in these areas. So silt and sediment are considered the largest source of water pollution in the United States. So leading causes of surface water impairment include pathogens, mercury, other metals, nutrients, sediments, oxygen depletion, pH changes, impaired biota, PCBs, temperature, turbidity, as well as pesticides. Now remember, I don't ask for you to remember many acts. We have the 1975 Endangered Species Act, and this is the 1972 Clean Water Act. And this protects our water. In 1972, the Clean Water Act was established, and it requires an easily revoked permit for any industry, municipality, or other entity dumping waste into surface waters. The permit requires disclosure of what is being dumped and gives regulators valuable data and evidence for litigation. Now we are shifting into the Flint, Michigan water crisis. Now I have this link. This will be link number 1, and it actually shows you when a time at which lead was actually used in the refining of our gasoline. So not too long ago, there was lead in our gasoline, and this lead was, as combustion engines would burn, lead would actually make its way into the atmosphere and then, work its way into water molecules and then, be rained on and impair many environments. So there was a huge conspiracy, and many, billion-dollar high rollers fought against, unleaded gas, because leaded gas was the way it was. And that would cost them millions of dollars to take the lead out of their gas. And with this video, you will see the corruption, and you will notice that many companies actually employ scientists. So there are, unfortunately, some scientists that sell their soul to big corporations, and they conduct studies which, are usually heavily flawed to, present data to public that, whatever, lead isn't bad, or the gas in lead isn't leaching out. You can manipulate studies, and many people have done this in the past. This is called a conflict of interest. If you have to employ a scientist that's working for you, that is a straight up conflict of interest, right? You should, employ somebody outside of your organization so they are unbiased, right? So in every scientific paper you might read, look at the source for funding. Who funded that research, right? Look and see if there's any conflicts of interest. So we're going to focus on the Flint, Michigan water crisis, which started in 2014. So pre-switch, the city got their water from 1970 or 67 to 2013. The city of Flint received water from the Detroit River, as well as Lake Huron. And they operated a plan to only use the Flint River as an emergency source. However, people in Congress here, they realized that switching over to the Flint River would actually save them millions of dollars. And so they implemented this huge process to switch the entire city's water supply, and they officially switched their water over to the Flint, Michigan in 2014. So again, switching water sources from Lake Huron and Detroit River to the Flint River. The Flint River was contaminated, but not to the levels expressed in people's homes. Now, that's something that I want us to really nail down. The water was polluted, but not nearly as much as people were finding in their homes. So what actually was going on is that the Flint water, the water from the Flint River, was very corrosive. So corrosive water can strip metals away from pipes. And this is exactly what this water from the Flint River did. Lead pipes, because Flint is this really old industrial city, you had old infrastructure, and their plumbing, their water pipes were made mostly up of lead pipes. Copper pipes are really good, but many of the even copper pipes had lead connectors, especially in Flint. So in 2014, on April 25th, you have this official switch over. And shortly after, in August, the city announces a boiling water advisory. So if you want to use the water, you have to boil it. How nice, right? So it's pretty crazy to me that a state of emergency wasn't issued right in August. A second warning was issued in September. In October of 2014, a GM factory, a plant discontinued their use of the Flint tap water because of high levels of chlorine and other corrosive materials actually corroded their engine parts. It's pretty crazy that a GM plant stopped using the water, and you're gonna still expect people to, in their own homes, to drink and bathe in this water if GM's not even using this water for the production of engines. In 2015, the EPA gets involved, and there was a nearly $10 million bill to reconnect the Detroit water system and provide relief. The switch was made the following day. However, remember, the actual source of the water wasn't the true source of pollution. It was the pipes, right? And much of this lead was leached out of the pipes with the corrosive Flint water. Here we have the Flint Mayor Karen Weaver declaring a state of emergency. In 2016, Obama declares a national state of emergency in Flint and authorizes a $5 million aid. 4 officials were charged with felonies and false pretenses of conspiracy. A federal judge orders the implementation of door-to-door delivery of bottled water to every home without a properly installed, maintained faucet of water. So yeah, that's nice. You're getting bottled water, but how do you bathe, right? How do you boil pasta, right? You can't live without pasta. In 2017, so we're just going through this timeline, I want us to understand that even today, modern day America, it takes several years to initiate a response, to get the proper funding, for presidents to get involved, for Congress to get involved, all because they wanted to save money, right? They wanted to save money by switching over to the Flint River. They end up spending millions and millions of dollars, right? So in 2017, the city realizes and Weaver announces that 6,000 homes have to get lead piping removed. Now, this was a $100 million grant approved by Congress. On May 3rd in 2017, a notice warning 8,000 residents that their water will be turned off after a lack of payment causes controversy in the city. So now their water is just straight up turned off. And it was reported on May 17th that 128 blood tests may have registered falsely low lead levels. So just a ton of corruption, right? When millions and millions of dollars are at stake, people do grimy things. And we see that. We see how dirty politicians are, saving money, as they get to drive their BMWs to work. There were, people living in poor neighborhoods that had their water turned off for weeks on end and just were living off bottled water. In 2018, the ball really gets rolling. Many lead pipes are removed. There are local universities that get involved in, identifying where these lead pipes are. And 90% of the water samples record 7 parts per billion of lead, which is, really low levels of lead. People believe that this is the year in which water quality was restored. In 2019, you have researchers studying the effects of the Flint water Michigan crisis, and a Virginia Tech professor, Mark Edwards, and Sid Roy published a peer review journal that shows a connection between rising levels of lead in city waste and blood levels in children. So, there are still some papers that are being published about the after effects of blood levels, especially in children. There are definitely going to be, physiological responses to increased lead in developing children's bodies. The outcomes, like I mentioned, President Obama was swift to initiate a state of emergency. In 2020, more than 25,000 water service lines were excavated. This resulted in the replacement of nearly 10,000 lead pipes and the verification of 15,500 existing copper pipes, right? And there is this website, and I could leave this on link 2. And this map actually shows today, and it changes throughout the year. The color of that indicates the type of pipes in that particular part of the city. So there still is areas of the city that have known lead pipes, because this is clearly going to take several years to fix the problem 100% by replacing all of those lead pipes. This is no easy task, but this map actually does show real time of where, there is a medium likelihood of lead and a known lead pipe. And through the years, you have seen more and more dark green, which is good, right? So here I want you to look at this video. And again, really crazy. So this will be link 3. So yes, it takes, even in the modern age, we have pollution arise, and it takes several years, even something as important as clean water, to be addressed, right? So I'm actually going to keep this one short. Thank you so much. There are a few students that have reached out to me throughout the semester, and I know it hasn't been very personable, but I commend you guys for your hard work. I really, really hope that you liked what I did here. I can comfortably say that I did do my best. I know online learning is not the easiest, but I didn't hold back. I taught all the stuff I normally teach, and I know it was pretty intense. A lot of information. There were some lectures that I just jammed it in, but again, I feel like this is a calling for me. I want to teach young people young, driven people about the environment, about our planet. I want you to become activists. I want you to realize your place on this planet, and that I want you to also understand that one person can make a huge difference. As I learned more and more about this stuff, I implemented many of these understandings to my own life. You guys know that, I work at a pizzeria too. My father owns Gino's Pizza Place. So if you ever want to come in and grab a slice, it's on Fries Road, Fries in Brighton. It's a little blue building. Come on through. But, even there, over the past 10 years, we increased our recycling by about 500%. So, we used to throw away all this stuff, and now we recycle so much. We use more sustainable packaging. So remember to be the change you want to see in the world, and hopefully you guys find something that you're passionate about. Rocco, say goodbye to the students. All right. It's been really cool, guys. Thank you for, continuing your academic journey throughout this trying semester. Hopefully, there is some sense of normalcy around the corner. But thanks again. Stay well. Focus on your mental health as well as your physical health. And I wish you all the best luck. Thanks again, guys. Have a good one.